Why title the presentation Lost in Translation? Well, I think everyone has their own view of what Venice should be, the quintessential tourist view. You arrive in San Marco, you have the Campanile, or you have the crowds, you've got the sunsets over the water, you've got the canals running through the city, you've got the grand architecture, combined with some new architecture principles. You've got the Calatrava Bridge, which is the first new bridge in 100 years. But then you also have the tourist kitsch. You have the shops selling masks everywhere. You've got the quintessential gondolier. And you've got the crowds that seem to come from everywhere and exist everywhere, and you wonder how to get away from the people and find some sense of what the real Venice is. The whole question in Venice then is, how do you find the real Venice? When you look at history, when you look at the large ships coming in, and you have the grand walk to school even, that's one of the most amazing views you could ever see. The real Venice is something that I think we were all looking to find. The more private Venice, the Venice of Venetians that isn't just devoted to tourists coming in for the day. So the time we found this was at night, when tourists would go away and the city becomes quiet, becomes somehow more intimate and closes in on you. And then even discovering that the path to your apartment is so narrow that you have to duck and almost crawl through. It's quite a wonderful experience. Imagine the surprise of the whole situation, because you have a group of students from Sydney. You team us up with a group of 60 Italian students, and the goal was to design the good life, the sort of a very broad view, which makes sense. I mean, it's the country of the dolce vita. The good life is the Italian essence. But the site, though, it isn't on the Grand Canal. It's not in Rome. It's not anywhere else. It's not even in Europe. It's actually in Sydney. It's on the Sydney Harbour, with the most grand view of the Opera House and the Harbour Bridge in the background. So it's these people from Sydney, we're bringing this site with us to show these Venetian students. They were able to then see some of the lost in translation that we had, because we were entering a new environment being there, and they were entering a new environment looking at Sydney. So both got to experience both directions a little bit. So the house was on the site was at the Strickland House, which is on the harbour foreshore, historic house with a very large property, and to design a set of villas that would embody emblems of the good life, each one to feature a specific way that the good life might be lived. So it has some wonderful cliffs, a beach, the old house, and everywhere you go, you either get views of a wonderful garden or views of the wonderful harbor. So essentially, you can't choose a bad place. The question then was how to get these Venetian students who are used to this very closed city that doesn't have, with no cars, with, where you walk everywhere, to a Sydney lifestyle, which is much more open. Requires travel over much more distance, and has just a different spirit. So that we had the 4th and 5th year Sydney students, along with 1st, 2nd, and 3rd year Italian students, many of whom didn't know English, adding to the translation factor. And finding out about Venetian life involved, of course, going out in the evening, partying, meeting students, seeing what they were like, and then them seeing what we were like. We had lectures introducing us to the idea of the beautiful butterfly and the elegant partie from Joseph Rickwert and Jing Ran, the professors for the trip. introduced us to the idea of how light plays into architecture, how you can create a space around a very specific feel. We were introduced to the works of Palladio. We did a weekend trip to many of his great villas and did models and studied both the great architecture of Renaissance Italy, but then also studied the great architecture of Sydney, and to see how each of these envelops and embraces its situation becomes the quintessential view of that place. So switching then from the old master in the Villa Rotunda to new masters becomes quite an interesting switch. And seeing then the works of Carlos Scarpa's Cemetery too, the transition then between the old Italian and the new Italian, not just the Sydney versus Italy, but the Italian versus Italian, was quite interesting to see how the thoughts of architecture in the country evolved over time. So then the trip for time became a cycle then between food, work, partying, working, sleeping. All these things were intrinsic to understanding the life in Venice and them understanding us, with finally the crashing at the end of the day, home from the villas or at the final exhibit, with everyone enjoying the culmination of these 3 weeks' work, including some inside humor, the pirate ship off the shore. So the final critique was done by Joseph Rickwert, who had some very interesting things to say about each proposal. And it was interesting to get the viewpoint of this quite incredible historian coming in, and because he is fluent in Italian and English and several other languages, so he could instantly sort of see a lot of the bridges that we had been learning how to make, which is quite an interesting thing. And it really shows the breadth of experience and how much that comes into play. So when the presentations were all done and all the models were on display on the tables, it was really quite interesting to see what 3 weeks' work could bring in a very complex and compressed setting. And then the school at the end threw us quite an amazing party. So the 1,600 architecture students there and us were all invited to the Lido, which is basically Venice's party beach. And they had rented a club for us, and it was quite an amazing way to celebrate the end of a summer. And then at the end as well, Venice itself threw us a party. So we got the party from the school, and then we had the Il Redentore Festival, which has been going on for more than 500 years. It becomes quite an amazing send-off to the city. So the whole thing sort of builds up and builds up and builds up. In the end, you have this massive fireworks display, and it seems very fitting as a way to end a few weeks. The biggest fireworks show I've ever seen, actually. And I think, in some ways, then the most important thing that we all learned was not just how to travel, not just being tourists, but actually learning that when you're in a new place, it teaches you a new way to see. So perhaps that is the quintessential aspect of the good life. It's living wherever you do, but choosing how to see the world in the way that fits, in the way that's best. So that's the good life.